Today I'd like to speak about marriage and immigration. Hi everybody, my name is Paul Wayburne. I'm an immigration attorney. Hi everybody, today I'd like to speak about marriage and immigration. Now there are good reasons to get married and there are bad reasons to get married. Now we know what the good reasons are, but I want to tell you about a bad reason to get married. A bad reason to get married is to get married for immigration purposes, because you will have a very unhappy marriage, a very unhappy immigration, and it'll take a high personal toll on you if you decide to get married for immigration purposes or other overwhelming reason you got married is for immigration purposes. As a general rule of advice, if your marriage is on the rocks, it's not a good idea to immigrate, because when a person immigrates, there are struggles that are inherent in immigration that don't include the marriage. But when a couple immigrates who are parties to a marriage which is on the rocks, so then the marriage is likely to fall apart once the immigration has taken place, because it's quite stressful to immigrate financially, culturally, and socially, and in every other way. And marriages that tend to fall apart if they are not happy ones to start off with. But also I'd like to talk about another type of marriage, which is that where a person gets married for immigration purposes, which essentially is fraud. One is misrepresenting to the United States that you entered into a marriage with a US citizen for reasons other than good reasons to enter into a marriage, when one of those reasons is immigration to the United States. One should never be too desperate to immigrate to the United States. If you live in a peaceful country, it's far better to not immigrate than to immigrate with the wrong partner. Now, I'd like to talk about how does USCIS assess whether a marriage has entered into in good faith through looking at the longevity of the marriage. In other words, how long have these two people been married? Now, if the spouse who is applying for the green card has been married for 2 years or less, so then it's more difficult. So what happens then is the USCIS will issue a conditional green card, and then after 2 years or just before 2 years, the immigrant spouse would need to apply to remove the conditions of the green card and include in that petition a lot of the joint documents that we're going to talk about in this video. Now, if you can't produce those joint documents or very many of those joint documents, so then USCIS will just think that you got married for immigration purposes and then deny to remove the conditions, and then a person will become deportable after that and will now have legal status within the United States. So that's one way, is that USCIS determines whether a marriage has been entered into for good faith, is how long the marriage has lasted. Another way is, does the couple live together? So one of the joint documents I insist upon, if it's possible to obtain, are either joint property deeds or joint leases. Now, typically for newly married couples, one joint lease is a really good document to have. But if you've been married for a couple of years and you've had a number of leases that held jointly by the couple, it's always a good idea to have more than one joint lease, including the current lease. Now, when that lease is not included, more often than not, I've received a request for further evidence, which is like a request for joint evidence, requesting joint documents to prove that a marriage was entered into for good faith and not for immigration purposes. Another way is the USCIS will look at pictures of you and your spouse and whether you have spent time together, gone on vacations together, celebrated happy occasions together, met each other's family. So all those photos are really great. They'll also look at wedding photos. Now, if you just have a court-based wedding, it's not great evidence of good faith intent, but it's fine, it's good. But if you have a more expensive wedding with a hall, and it was more of an elaborate wedding, so that is more indicative of good faith. The other way of assessing good faith, and this applies at all stages really of the green card process, so that is whether the couple has joint finances and joint utility documents. So the lease is a good document to have, but it's always better to add utility bills. In other words, joint documents issued to both spouses concerning utility bills, that is water, gas, and electricity. And the more of those documents you have, the more you have a better case. Other examples include joint insurance, or joint car insurance, joint rental insurance, life insurance, where each of you are beneficiaries. So those are great documents to have. I try and insist on this, I usually do insist on this, if at all possible, is that potential immigrants should have joint bank account, not just a joint bank account with $500, but joint bank accounts showing continuous transactions over a period of time. Couples who don't get married for the right reasons, or couples who get married for immigration purposes, usually don't have joint finances. They don't want to mingle their finances because they don't trust each other. So sometimes if a client comes in and they say, we don't want joint bank accounts, there are good reasons for a couple not wanting to have joint bank accounts, but then one has to assess whether they have other documents to show that they have a good faith marriage other than joint bank accounts. But generally, joint bank accounts going back for a period are really, really good to have. And I would argue in most cases, essential to have. People who have gotten married for the wrong reasons don't have joint bank accounts. Another potential joint document is joint car ownership and joint loans from the bank to pay for the car. Same would apply to mortgage statements as well. If a couple who just got married for immigration purposes are unlikely to share a car, take out loans together, etc. Similar other documents for older couples would include joint retirement accounts, life insurance where the one spouse has left their estate to the other spouse. A good idea is also reciprocal estate plans or reciprocal wills. Those are great ideas. So sometimes couples don't have a lot of these documents. With respect to bank accounts, so a lot of banks won't issue joint bank accounts to people who don't have social security numbers, and people who apply for adjustment of status, in other words, they apply for a green card in the United States, they won't have a social security number. And a lot of the smaller banks, in my experience, or the credit unions, will not issue joint bank accounts. I have seen people be successful with the bigger banks. That's Wells Fargo, Chase, and Bank of America. I'm not saying not a representative of those banks, but in the past, I have seen clients who have been successful in getting joint bank accounts at the three bigger banks. Okay, let's just talk about some other documents. You can get a religious marriage certificate. You can get contracts and receipts relating to your wedding. You can get a synagogue, church, or mosque membership. You can get WhatsApp texts. Usually people don't like to give me the exported file from their WhatsApp text because it's very private. So I always say to my clients, never argue in your text. If you want to use that as evidence before USCIS, you can show screenshots of video calls, but that's very weak evidence. And so it's really, really important when one is getting married, or at least one has entered into a marriage for the right reasons and not for immigration purposes, that one contacts an attorney, because most clients wouldn't have got those joint documents if they did not speak to an attorney, and they would have made their immigration case more difficult to cross the threshold, which is the green card, without them. And I do my best to assess whether a client has provided sufficient joint documents which have good weight. And so it's always really important. Sometimes they have given joint documents and we still get the request for evidence, but that's usually when there isn't a lease. So it's always important to speak to an attorney, because even though it's supposedly easier to obtain a green card through marriage, if you marry the wrong spouse or you don't know what you're doing in your immigration papers, it can cause many problems in your immigration and your marriage. It cannot be understated how valuable an attorney could be in this process. Thanks very much.